Hi, everyone. Welcome to the final lecture of MC 253 Film History for the semester. Today, we're going to be talking about contemporary auteurs, and we're going to focus primarily, in fact, exclusively on American auteurs. There are a lot of fantastic international auteurs right now we could talk about, but there's just too many to talk about. In fact, there's probably too many American auteurs to talk about. We're going to focus primarily on three today, but I wanted to just highlight quickly a few more. I'm sure all of you have your favorite directors right now that you'd love to talk about, and I'm just going to mention a few here. You see, Spike Lee, Richard Linklater, and Alexander Payne. These are all three directors who've been around for a little while. In fact, Spike Lee, you can almost stick him with the classic auteurs. His first film came out in 1986 with She's Gotta Have It, so he's been around for a long time, but he's still a very relevant filmmaker. I think some things, and I think probably most of you are familiar with his work, but he loves to push people's buttons. He loves to get dialogue going, especially as it relates to race relations. I think if you see one film by Spike Lee, definitely try to check out Do the Right Thing. It's probably considered his masterpiece, and it's really considered one of the great films of all time. So do get a chance to check that film out. Richard Linklater, he's been around too since the 90s. And I think probably his best film, most people consider Boyhood, I think his best film. It's a really impressive film if you've never seen it, that follows a boy growing up literally over the course of 12 years. They were filming this movie. But as far as his themes, his recurring themes, he loves to kind of focus on these fleeting moments of our lives. Some of you might be familiar with this trilogy he did, the Before Sunrise trilogy, where we're following these two people and we have just that one day to be together. So they kind of cram all this life into this one quick moment. And that's something he likes to do again and again, just the impact of time and how it's always kind of passing so quickly. Another director, maybe you haven't heard of Alexander Payne. He's an Omaha based filmmaker. He likes to do films primarily set in the Midwest. He loves shooting films in Omaha. And he likes to do typically satires that revolve around middle class America. His films are kind of funny in a dry way, and almost always people are seeking some kind of sense of who they are, some kind of self fulfillment. He's got a lot of really cool films. Sideways, I think, is often considered his best film, but personally, I like About Schmidt a lot. I also like Election. Those are two really cool films that you might want to check out. I wanted to bring up a few more recent directors. There's a lot of really cool filmmakers just getting started right now. And probably these are people you're more familiar with. I think Jordan Peele's a really interesting filmmaker. He's almost invented a new genre. It's like this horror film genre, but it's social issue horror films, which is really unique. His most famous film, of course, is Get Out, and he had another film called Us. But it's going to be interesting to see where his career goes if he keeps kind of delving into this kind of horror genre, or if he's going to kind of explore other genres along the way. Greta Gerwig is another very interesting filmmaker. Her first film was Lady Bird, and she just recently had Little Women come out. She's based out of Sacramento, and we're going to talk about actually her partner later, Noah Baumbach. The two of them are partners right now, and they collaborate quite a bit. But Greta, her stories almost always deal with kind of female empowerment. You see that a lot with Little Women, of course, but you also see that in Lady Bird, and also just the difference between classes. She likes to delve into those issues as well. Evidently, the next film she wants to work on is Barbie. I think she's going to work on that film with Noah Baumbach. That will be really interesting to see what the two of them do with that topic. And I think Margot Robbie might be set to star in that film. The last filmmaker I want to talk about here is Sean Baker, and he's actually the director of the film we'll be watching this week, The Florida Project. maybe you haven't heard of Sean Baker. He's a really unique filmmaker. He makes these almost guerrilla style films where he'll sometimes shoot entire films using iPhones. And he loves to go out and highlight communities that are kind of forgotten. You'll see that certainly in the film you watched this week, the Florida Project, where there's this whole kind of hidden homeless group living in Florida just outside of a Disney World. And he likes to highlight other communities too. I think you'll find him a unique filmmaker. His stories don't have real tight plots. It's more about these moments, but it's really interesting to kind of take a look at people that you might not be aware of. Okay, so let's kind of dig maybe into three filmmakers with more depth. And we're going to look at three filmmakers who do have a lot of similarities. They're all about the same age, they've been working in film for about the same time, and they even have some recurring themes. But if we look at these three directors, I think you'll find that there's quite a bit of stylistic differences between them. We're going to start with probably the one you're most familiar with, and that's Wes Anderson. I think everybody's probably seen a Wes Anderson film at some point, and you have a feel for his unique look. He does definitely have one of the most unique looks to come out in recent memory. But from a thematic standpoint, there's also a lot of things that recur in his work. You'll see a lot of family stories in his films, and typically with these family stories, there's something that's kind of been broken within the family. We look at a film like the Royal Tenenbaums, where you have a father who kind of left the family long ago, and he's trying to reconnect with them. You'll see that kind of storyline play out quite a bit, where people have to kind of overcome those past sins and forgive family members for what they did. And usually that's the case. Usually those things are forgiven. His characters are almost always intellectuals, typically urban intellectuals. That's an important part of their lives. And you'll see that recur again in his characters as well. You also see people in his films really trying to run away from their problems, or just maybe even trying to get to another place, trying to escape their own lives. Rushmore is a really good example of this, where you have this character who fantasizes about being this brilliant person, but he's really a failing student in a lot of ways. So he tries to escape kind of those failures by immersing himself in fantasy or in kind of outside of school activities that give him kind of meaning in life. Wes Anderson's films are definitely funny, but not kind of laugh out loud funny. I mean, they're really smart, dry humor, but that humor is always mixed with real like pain, real sadness at times. Royal Tenenbaums is a great example of this, where you'd have some very funny scenes, but then you have some really heartbreaking, difficult scenes side by side with that. So it's kind of a unique blend. See those two kind of playing with each other. And a lot of the things that he's dealing with as far as the pain side of things almost always revolves around either lost love or lost dreams. Those tend to be the things that recur most in his stories. From a stylistic standpoint, this is where Wes Anderson really stands out, and probably within 30 seconds of watching a Wes Anderson film, you'll know it's a Wes Anderson film. He's really kind of created his own look, and this look starts kind of permeating in our own society too. You see a lot of commercials that have the Wes Anderson look. Some things you'll look for in his style. He loves symmetry in his compositions, and he loves to use the wide screen. He likes to shoot things kind of flat on too, kind of straight on compositions. And when he cuts, he likes to cut to the perpendicular, meaning he'll cut to maybe a 90-degree angle away from that, always kind of straight on as opposed to angled camera placements. His films are always very colorful. He fills his frame up with just detail and vibrancy. He's obsessed with production design. Maybe you've seen some of his preparation for films, things like Grand Budapest Hotel, where he just goes in and thinks about all the little details of a film. Just even looking at this still photo right here, probably he had drawn out exactly what her library looks like, even down to the detail of having the name tags there for the different playwrights. Those are all things that he's heavily involved with in the pre production phase. He's got a strange fascination with Futura bold font. You see it right there, the Library of Plays. That's written in Futura bold. He uses this often in his production design for things that are on doorways or whatever it might be. He likes to do quick pans, and a lot of his films end with a slow motion sequence. Or he'll do a sequence in a film where things slow down and then they'll speed back up. He uses that technique quite a bit. And there's a quote from Wes Anderson, which I think is probably true. Probably we're none of us are normal. Um, or if we are normal, then I don't know. I'm gonna go ahead and just avoid talking about that one. Okay, some key films from Wes Anderson. I think a lot of people look at Royal Tenenbaums as maybe his best film. Personally, I'm a big fan of Rushmore. That was his second film. But all of his films have a real unique style. That some people have kind of claimed that his films are kind of too much style and not enough maybe heart or authenticity, but certainly with Wes Anderson, you're going to get kind of what you get with his style of storytelling. I think Bill Murray has maybe been in almost every one of his films since Rushmore. I'm pretty sure of that. He likes to work the same DP quite a bit, and he also collaborates a lot with Owen Wilson as far as writing and also as an actor. Okay, so that's Wes Anderson. The next director we want to talk about, he might be somebody, Noah Baumbach, who you recently have been made aware of because of the success of Marriage Story, which just came out last year. He's also been around for a while, since the mid 90s. But I think recently people have become a little bit more aware of his films. He's an independent filmmaker who works primarily in the East Coast. And his films have a lot of, I think, similarities with Wes Anderson in that they're dealing with characters who tend to be insecure and also just kind of dysfunction within families. Those kind of things happen in the same way, I think, in his films. But there's different obsessions that he'll have as far as themes. I think one of the main things Baumbach likes to do is focus on these transitional moments in life. And it almost mirrors his own life, where his film career, if you look at it, whatever age he was or whatever life stage he was in, that's the kind of story he'll be telling. And you can almost see his evolution as a person as you go through his film career. He's joked before that his films are about the problems that are faced by the East Coast elite. And of course, primarily the problems that you're going to see from his characters are just angst about life, as opposed to legitimate problems with I don't have enough food, I don't have a place to live. Those kind of things are not problematic for the characters in his world. They're all very educated urbanites. They've got everything they need, but there's still something that's missing inside of them, and that's the problems that he tends to deal with. Just issues of insecurity, just melancholy, just all those kind of dysfunctional things that occur within families or within life. That's kind of the territory that he likes to spend his time. I just recently heard this term, mumblecore genre, but it certainly applies to a lot of his films, especially his earlier films. Um, Low budget, dialogue driven, youth oriented. That's kind of a lot of his early work. If you've ever seen a film called Clerks by Kevin Smith, that's kind of an example of what we call mumblecore. And they have kind of this French New Wave vibe where they're, loose camera work, loose structure, all those kind of things fit with mumblecore. So he's made a lot of contributions to that with his early films. One thing he's known for is his dialogue, and he's very meticulous with his dialogue. Evidently on set, actors are not allowed to change a single word or even a single pause that's written into his script because he takes so much time making sure each word is perfect. His films are very funny, but kind of in the same way that Wes Anderson is funny, in that it's drier, kind of smart humor, but also we're mixing in, kind of that those painful moments as well. And if you've seen films like The Squid and the Whale or Marriage Story, definitely a lot of painful moments within those films. He likes to focus on small things. You'll see this a lot in his film called Frances Ha, where we're following her life and just these small little moments in her life that, as taken as one, it's not so significant, but then you start seeing these things kind of strung out together and you start seeing this life emerge and this her arc emerge and seeing her growth as a character through these small moments that occur in her life. He likes to kind of structure films around that. There's his quote, and I think it's similar to Wes Anderson. We're all not normal. We all haven't figured ourselves out. Those are all issues, I think, that kind of revolve around the angst that a lot of these filmmakers that we're talking about feel. His key films, I think the three you see there, The Squid and the Whale, Frances Ha, and Marriage Story, are all really strong films. And all of them are pretty different, too. I think if you're looking for something kind of, I guess, lighter, not so heavy, Frances Ha would be a great one. But it's probably my favorite or most entertaining of the films I've seen from him. It's just a really great film, and he collaborated with Greta Gerwig on this story. They actually co-wrote the script, and she was the star of the film. And you can kind of see her influence in this as well. If you've seen Lady Bird, there's definitely some connections between Lady Bird and Frances Ha. But definitely check out Marriage Story. It's a very powerful, well-crafted film, and The Squid and the Whale too. It's more of a semi-autobiographical film because it kind of shows how he felt as his parents were going through a divorce. It's almost like from his perspective. So that one is another great film to check out. Greta Gerwig, of course, is a primary collaborator. Adam Driver, you see show up in a lot of his films. He's a great actor, and Ben Stiller has been in a lot of his films as well. Okay, last director, Paul Thomas Anderson, and probably you're familiar with him, or maybe you've seen a film by Paul Thomas Anderson. He doesn't put out a lot of work. It usually takes several years between his films because they're such big projects. They're such involved stories. It takes a lot of research to kind of prepare for filming. So there's big gaps in time between his work. Some things we're going to look for as far as themes. There's that kind of commonality between Wes Anderson, Noah Baumbach, and himself. This kind of consistent thematic uh, influence of dysfunctional families and alienation as well. I think maybe the difference in P.T. Anderson's stories, he tends to focus on surrogate families a lot, where a group of kind of outcasts come together to kind of form this makeshift family. You see this really most notably in Boogie Nights, but also, There Will Be Blood. You've got the father figure who takes in the son. In The Master, you see that kind of still image here. Joaquin Phoenix's character is kind of taken on by Philip Seymour's character there as well. And as far as just overall tone in his films, they tend to lean towards darker subjects. There Will Be Blood, definitely has dark themes that we're dealing with. Magnolia, just kind of dealing with characters who are at times almost decadent, doing really bad things, yet he still finds a way to be sympathetic and find humanity in those characters. A lot of times you'll see this angel character in his films where there's this one good person who needs to almost rescue somebody who's in deep need of redemption. Punch Drunk Love, that's a good example of this one, where you see this woman who needs to, in a sense, rescue this broken man and kind of pull him back into, I guess, normalcy again. And you'll see this kind of happen again and again in Anderson's work. As far as stylistically, he's a very technically accomplished filmmaker. He's got a real gift for just a craft of film, specifically the way he moves camera. He likes to have these extended sequence shots. He has unusual transitions he'll use. He opens up the whole kind of toolkit as far as cinematic style when it comes to making his films. And his films, as you go from film to film, can have different looks as well, depending on what story that he's telling. But he does have just a really nice style. And he loves music. He makes great use of music in his films. He works a lot with Johnny Greenwood, who is the lead guitarist of Radiohead, who creates these really innovative film scores. And a lot of times he's also using kind of more found music that fits the era that he's dealing with. Like in Boogie Nights, it's kind of revolved around the 1970s pornography industry. So a lot of the music in that film is from the era, which helps set time and place. And a lot of times he's using songs to kind of create maybe meaning or tone from that. In Magnolia, he has almost an entire soundtrack written by Amy Mann, which kind of creates this, I guess, overall vibe and kind of this idea of kind of alienation and lostness kind of comes through the music in that film. His films are rarely small. They're almost always very long films. I mean, 2.5 hours is kind of his standard length, and they tend to be very epic in scope, very complicated. The stories themselves, they're not your standard tightly structured plot lines. They tend to be a little bit more episodic, um, just not so, I guess, hitting those beats that you might think about with a standard screenplay. He's very innovative, I think, with story, and he's very nonconformist, I think, in the way he tells films. He kind of goes off in whatever direction he'd like to go, and his whole body of work tends to kind of jump off into new genres or new topics. He really doesn't do the same film twice. He's a person who does like to kind of, I guess, rebel against things. You kind of see that just in the films he makes, where he doesn't want to make the same film. He wants to, and I think he kind of pushes back against the Hollywood system a little bit as well, although he's still kind of working within it. So you see that in his work. I think a lot of people look at There Will Be Blood as his best film, but Magnolia is a fantastic film, and as well as Boogie Nights. I think those are all really interesting films to see. And again, they're all extremely different from each other, but all these big topics, big stories with lots of characters over a long period. I think all of them are, I think, worth checking out. But if you have one place to maybe start, you might check out There Will Be Blood. He works with Daniel Day-Lewis. He's worked with him a couple times, also in Phantom Thread. Likes to work with the same DP, and of course, I already mentioned Johnny Greenwood as a composer he works with, especially recently on his films. Okay, that's enough for kind of our brief look at some contemporary auteurs. We'll have the final exam coming up, so I've got the study guide up on the website now for you to check out on the Moodle page. And I'll send you an email as well that talks more about that test. But hopefully you enjoy the final film of the semester, the Florida Project, and I'll talk to you soon.